Oscar and Lucy, Chapter 2. The psychologist Kenneth Pope has an interesting description of a meeting in the early years of the American Psychological Association, a significant meeting that became part of psychological folklore. It has never been very clear where it took place, but when was relatively certain. July 1892, July the 8th to be precise. Some of the giants of the discipline were there, people like William James, James Cattell, Joseph Jastrow. Pope goes on to explain that 40-odd years later, someone had commissioned him to write a history of the association and reached the point where he had to describe this famous meeting. He realized that two of those present, Cattell and Jastrow, were actually still alive. So he asked them what went on, what was discussed, and so forth. After all, a little circumstantial detail can go a long way to brighten up a dull history. Both men denied ever having been at such a meeting. Indeed, they were so convincing in their denial that it became clear it never took place. The memory of the event, in this case an oft-repeated shared memory, was quite simply false. I want to consider the mental activity we call reminding. How did Proust's Madeleine biscuit have that magical effect? How did thinking about my father and his miserable war come to remind me of Oscar? Because it certainly did. You may well ask, who's Oscar anyway? But you'll have to be patient on that score. We have work to do first, and I have to say more than a little about the psychology of memory. When I started out on the rutted road to a career as a professional psychologist, I chose to write a doctoral thesis on why we forget. If I'd been wiser, I would have asked why we remember, for that's surely the more interesting question. But I was young, and after all, forgetting is interesting enough. Shakespeare, at least in the early plays, offers two accounts of memory failure. The first notion is that new memories simply replace old ones. He's a bit vague as to where the old ones go, and you're left assuming they simply vanish. His second idea rests on the ancient belief that memories are like impressions on a wax tablet. Hence, although the message may be potent, the medium isn't, and the memories disappear because what supports them gradually wears out. My own modest research confirmed a conclusion that was already well known. Memory could not possibly work along either of the lines sketched out by Shakespeare. The truth was altogether more bizarre, even a little frightening. But to appreciate that, you have to go back a bit. In 1899, not long after that meeting that never took place, Sigmund Freud wrote a brief account of the memories of one of his patients. It was an essay on what he called screen memory. The patient, under psychoanalysis, uses an early memory, in this case charged with sexual symbolism, to screen out his later memory of an adolescent love affair. In other words, the precise opposite of Shakespeare's first idea. This is what the patient said. I see a rectangular, rather steeply sloping piece of meadowland, green and thickly grown. In that green there are a great number of yellow flowers, common dandelions. At the top end of the meadow there's a cottage, and in front of the cottage door two women are chatting busily, a peasant with a handkerchief in her hand and a children's nurse. 3 children are playing in the grass. One of them is myself, between the age of 2 and 3. The others are my boy cousin, who's a year older than me, and his sister, who's almost exactly the same age as I am. We are picking the yellow flowers, and each of us is holding a bunch of them we've already picked. The little girl has the best bunch, and as though by mutual agreement, we, the 2 boys, fall on her and snatch away her flowers. She runs away up the meadow in tears, and as a consolation, the peasant woman gives her a big piece of black bread. Hardly have we seen this than we throw the flowers away, hurry to the cottage, and ask to be given some bread too. And we are in fact given some. Peasant woman cuts the loaf with a long knife. In my memory, the bread tastes quite delicious. And at that point, the scene breaks off. Well, to the right professional eyes, this catalogue of sexual symbolism is almost comically explicit, squeezing in bedwetting, masturbation, rape, and castration, along with the yellow flowers. I do know the links are a bit obscure, but then so is psychoanalysis, believe me. It's tempting, but I'm not going to discuss all that. I will simply point to what the patient went on to say, and that's not obscure at all. I quote, "It seems to me almost a certainty that these childhood memories never occurred to me at all in my earlier years." Freud's conclusion on the subject was equally radical. I quote, "It may indeed be questioned whether we have any memories at all from our childhood. Memories relating to our childhood may be all that we possess. Our childhood memories show us our earliest years not as they were, but as they appeared in the later periods when the memories were aroused. In these periods of arousal, the childhood memories did not, as people are accustomed to say, emerge. They were formed at that time. And a number of motives with no concern for historical accuracy had a part in forming them, as well as the selection of the memories themselves. The idea that memory is a matter of active construction with no concern for historical accuracy, rather than passive recovery, was taken up and developed in Sir Frederick Bartlett's book, Remembering, published in 1932. Please remember that date if you would, it will come in useful later. Bartlett was Professor of Psychology in Cambridge University, a very remarkable man who will loom large in this tale. Rather than look at specific memories and dreams, Bartlett carried out deceptively simple experiments in which people read folk stories and then, much later, were probed to see how well they'd remembered what they'd read. They didn't do too badly, all things considered, but the results were far more interesting than that. Memories of what they read were distorted in systematic ways, assimilated into the beliefs and attitudes of the readers. Much of what was remembered was plausible and coherent and could well have been something previously read, but it was false, invented, made up. People were sure of what they remembered of the stories, and it made sense to them. Indeed, often it made more sense than the original. The problem was, it bore little relation to what they'd actually read. This is starting to sound quite alarming. Is memory that malleable, that unreliable? We spend a lot of our time interacting with other people, talking to them, laughing with them. We remember things about them, what they've said to us in the past, what we've said to them. When I'm talking to you, I believe your memories of what I said to you the other day are the same as mine. What if I'm wrong? William James, one of those at that meeting that never took place, was the brother of Henry James, the author. In writing about memory, he, that is William, tellingly compared it to fiction. Fiction, he said, has this unique ability to expel reality from memory and reign in its stead alone. In that regard, we're all authors. We're authors of ourselves. The personal history that defines and sustains us, the rehearsed fragments of our life, the things we cherish or fear, encounters, kisses, trials, humiliations, battles. It's an intricate world of fictions. Fictions that long ago displaced reality, if indeed there ever was a reality. Memories are consequently quite often false. Oddly enough, they may be true to something, albeit false to the facts. We shall come to that later. The ability to believe contradictory things is what makes us human. The fact that we routinely accept mutually inconsistent chains of inference allows us to function as social, political animals. Incidentally, it also allows writers of detective fiction to earn an honest crust.